I've been a security guard in my company for over 2 years now, but the work that my company does is not your typical run-of-the-mill. To put it simply, my company accepts jobs which no other security company will. That includes a high-risk assignments, which often results in loss of staff members, all the potential dangers that I would be facing. They also made me sign an NDA and a bunch of other papers which stated that if something were to happen to me yet, the company would not be held responsible. They explained that the job is risky but also paid well. I've been jobless for a while, then jumped at the opportunity regardless of I like most of the companies that way. They made me read through the entire NBA aloud and made sure that I was aware of all the rules. Is some of the things that I read there made me think initially that this was all a joke, but then I saw that my superior was really serious. My job would basically be to provide support to the guards at other posts via cops and patrol the perimeter that I was stationed at. Now our HQ was, which had multiple companies rent in the adjacent buildings. I would mostly work nights, with the occasional morning, and the rules are where his followers. I was to do a full sweep of the compound in all offices save for Building 4 and the call center office. I was not to approach a Building 4 under any circumstances, no matter what I heard from the outside, even if I saw someone inside from the windows. When I asked for more details, they refused to answer me, stating that I should simply obey their orders. If I value my life now, people have a normal 9-to-5 job in that building and nothing seems to be wrong during the daytime. When I do ask the employees about during my morning shift style, they all seem to either not know anything or abruptly find an excuse to on the conversation sex play designer company. The rules were even stranger. Here's what the chief told me. Yet sometimes run into someone, a woman to be precise. She's going to try to start a conversation with you. It is imperative that you ignore her presence at all costs. She will try to talk to you, but she will never get in your way. Here an extremely important role to remember, and I cannot stress this enough, is that if you see her in the floating, don't run or exit the building before finishing your sleep. Trust me, she'll know and do the sweep as you normally would, jack every room, and then quietly, I said, ignoring her all the way, she will become increasingly agitated and violent. I might even try to start with you, tell you that there's something behind you in a very convincing manner. Just ignore her if you don't. Well, if you don't want to know. What happened to the last cards play woman once, and it was a grueling and agonizing experience that I would rather not talk about. Another rule that I had to remember was not opening the gate between the hours of 22:07. The chief said that under no circumstances I might open the gate, even if the next guard comes to 5 minutes earlier to relieve me of my duty here. The gate was to remain closed. And then bring me to the experience that I had once, and it was about 6 months after I hung up and then realized that it was 6:50 a.m., I started the silhouette on the other side of the gate who suddenly started banging on the door and demanding to be let in the stadium, that he had lost his cell phone and that he was the real coworker. I retreated to the guardhouse and waited for what seemed like forever until the banging stopped. In reality it only lasted until 7 a.m. Those were all the rules that I had to follow on my own post, and most of the time I've heard stories from other coworkers, since I'm in contact with the guards at other posts. One of them told me the story. He had worked as a guard in a residential building, and one night an old man who lived there called him to come to his apartment. He didn't explain what was wrong, just told him to go there, and so we did. When he had reached the apartment, the wife of the old man was crying, saying that her husband was dead, and the guard tried convincing. Better man was very much alive and had in fact brought him there, but when he turned around at the old man was gone, and it was then that he saw the old man's body and his chair next to his shopping wife make what? The same night, Another creepy thing that happened was on a farmstead which our company has guards posted on. A guy by the name of Jeff who worked there told me about his own experience which made him run away from his post, and in the middle of the night. So apparently the what time is empty at that time, since I needed some more stuff built first. But his duty was to basically patrol circles around the farm and make sure that there are no squatters. Our Randalls, someone died as he's walking around here, is someone calling his name in a playful tone. He dismisses it as his imagination at first, but when it requires he asks who's there and demands they show up with their hands in the air. Now I haven't seen this so I can't guarantee anything. But Jeff swears that it's true. He says all of a sudden, out of the crops, a man who stands up at the top of the crops I reach to his waist, which was technically impossible because the crops themselves were taller than Jeff and he's a pretty tall guy, but the mandarins at Jeff and continues calling his name playfully as if he's still hiding from him. Needless to say, Jeff didn't stick around to see what that guy wanted to HQ. They said there were sightings of that man in the past, always calling the names of the guards, but never really do anything harmful. And the final thing that I'll share with you here is my experience when I was stationed at a hospital for 1 month. It was a private clinic of some sorts, and my job is to basically monitor the camera feed, and camera 3 was off, though, and when I asked why, they told me to keep it that way and never turn it off. From time to time I see play person in the field, which covered the outside of the security office, and that he would have just be standing there facing the door. I was to remain in my office when that happened, and then I glanced at the door. He would usually disappear after about 30 minutes or so, and patrolled in was strictly prohibited between the hours of 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. The money is one of the reasons why I haven't caught so far, and the dangerous aren't that bad. Once you get used to that, do you know what you're doing? And, plus, getting stationed at a different pose, it keeps the job adventurous and dynamic. If any of you lack any special talents or qualifications, like me, this job is perfect for you. So a lot of you are asking to hear more about my job and the duties that come along with it. I'll be sharing in this post more about the stories that I have and what I heard from the other garage. I know you wanted to know more about I'll be sharing my experience with that first. This happened about a year ago, but I still dread going back to the building every time. During my patrol I was doing a sweep of the building using my flashlight to illuminate my path as I was done checking one of the offices, and I turned around and my heart really popped out of my chest, and it was a woman in her late 20s, she was just standing there staring at me here, not even flinching at the lights in her face. I was about to talk to her. I was thinking she was a squatter, completely forgetting about the rules, since I never once encountered by that. And then, when I remember the rules that I was supposed to ignore her, my heart has started to come fast. My lord, my flashlight to my waist to pretending that to prevent her from seeing my beam bouncing up and down for my trembling, and I remember that I had to do a full sweep before I leave, and if she was here and I was only done with 1 floor, so what the thought of this? I cursed in my mind. Hey, I'm sorry. I think I fell asleep in one of the offices and stayed after closing, she said, but I ignored her. I pretended to look around some more, but know that I could only do it for so long before she got suspicious. So I decided to test my luck and just went for the door as soon as I was in, just close to where she stepped aside and let me move along my stroke to the next, but her following me right behind me. Hey, can you please let me out? My children have to be worried sick. The next 15 minutes or so she was breathing down my neck, constantly trying to grab my attention. She pointed to the corner opposite of where my beam was inside it. Hey, who's that over there? I saw the earth to look there, and knowing that she was lying, but I was scared that someone would have just jumped me right around the corner. And as I progressed with my sleep, she became increased in the irritated throwing stuff in my direction, and none of me, remind you, but trying to start with me right in front of my face. I know you can see me, and I know you know I'm here. I can see how scared you are. Ignored all of it as much as I could, and by the time I was back in the first floor, more than ready to get out, she was saying things like, "Are you sure you checked all the rooms?" My Carter and Iris station on floor 43, which was undergoing renovations. Our job was to simply stand in front of a door, the door at a card reader, and we were given access, but we were strictly forbidden from entering people. That hazmat suits would be coming in and out all day long, from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and we were to let them in and out whenever they please. Keep in track of the number of people who came and went. Now they catch was after a 1601 will return, order them entirely. And there would always be at least 3 people who would try to leave the room after 1600 hours, always asking politely, and become an increase in the desperate, saying that they had simply lost track of time, and they would play with us, saying that their family was waiting for them at home. And we always ignore their crying and pleading that, no matter how desperate what is, until they turn into wipers and then finally stopped. No, I've only seen the room from the door, and from what I could see here, it was just a normal room undergoing renovation, like the rest of the floor. So whatever was in there, I must have been deeper inside her head in plain sight. As for the numbers that we tried, the number of people who got out, by the end of the day it was always lower than the number of people who went in. One story is our name too. Chris told me about his time in an old mansion guarding a big mirror, and his co-worker and the security room petroleum every hour, especially making sure that the mirror was covered with the shade. They were to, under no circumstances, look at the mirror lady camera feet of the mirror, which was on the bottom floor under the stairs, but it was turned so that the reflective side of face away from the camera. This one night Chris's co-worker goes for a patrol, and just to come off because it was a fast and tightly here, but somehow I did, and his partner just to find himself staring at the mirror, and Chris locks the security room as per the instructions from HQ and calls the intervention team. Meanwhile he glances back at the camera feed only to find his co-worker. "Are you still staring blankly in the mirror?" I thought the camera was frozen, but the timer was moving. So his partner, was it just a very still? And he tried radio in him, but there was no response after about a minute or so. All of a sudden his partner pulls out his gun, but it's into his mouth, and finishes the job, and Chris was transferred the next day, since a special team was sent to secure the mirror, and his services were no longer in one position that everyone is massively trying to apply for. Is the surveillance officer in a small town close to my own, and why they want the position is what I'll get you in the bed, but basically the camera feed on the monitors in HQ over there cover various private households. One of the households that's said to have a man in a suit to show up at the door and stuff from time to time. No, usually, and guards need to go out to the address and make sure, or to apprehend the intruder. But for this specific individual, HQ left a very unique guide. Here are the instructions that left by HQ. If the security official notices an individual in business attire on camera at 12 during a shaft, these steps below must be followed when confronting the individual. 1. Approach the individual and wait for him to turn around, and he continue to smile for the entirety of the conversation, but should his expression change, disengage and run to safety as quickly as possible. Be advised that while firearms are not prohibited, they are highly effective against the individual. Do not turn or look away from the individual once he has turned around. Unless you need to evacuate too, the individual will after turn it around and quieter. Lovely night, isn't it? if the individual previous step and evacuate. 3. If the individual has inquired the aforementioned question that respond with yes, it is, what can I do for you? Or indeed it is, how can I help you? What a combination of both works as well. If the individual ceases to smile during this interaction, proceed to evacuate immediately. Yet 4, if done correctly, the individual can you sing me a song. If he says anything else, evacuate. 5 o'clock from here you were to sing me pretty Todd song to the individual while ignoring his thoughts and distractions. If so much as one word, a pause, or telling her stress or missed, evacuate. If the individual stops smiling during the song, evacuate 6. If done correctly, the individual will say splendid, thank you for the beautiful song. If he says anything aside from that, evacuate at 7 o'clock if it stops. 6 was done correctly. You close your eyes for at least 10 seconds and then open them on the front steps, where the individual still will not be a briefcase containing a large sum of money, while the individual themselves will be gone in the household, save 8 on the way. Various ages in dire need of help. Most common occurrences included starving women with no more, babies, lost children and attractive young women hitchhiking, etc. They're to be ignored and not offered assistance under any circumstances. 9. Return to post and turn off the camera. 12. No to. The company does not claim the reward from the individual. Therefore security official is afraid to keep it. The highest, high reward position makes it attractive to many people. The most of them never live to tell the tale. I was also told that the candidates go through rigorous training focusing primarily on sprinting. The candidates also need to pass the test which simulates the unconscious with the businessman no less than 5 times, with a 95% or higher score. They are forced to remember the song perfectly, going through a computerized scanner which detects any notes which are off. Not even know what the song is, but I was told it's a simple tune which sounds like something taught in preschool. Anyway, and this is as far as I'll go on this post, but I have some more stories to share in my future updates. In the meantime, that stay safe and try to stay away from these kinds of things. This sound attractive, due to pay your rush some people thrive on, but a tiny mistaking cost you your life or worse. Here's some more stories about places that I was stationed at and the ones that I heard from other guards in the company. A lot of these guards are around anymore and I reckon the same could happen to me at any moment of my shift. So if in case there's a lack of updates, most likely something's happened to me. So one memorable experience that I've had, and not in a good way, it was when I was stationed at a local park with another guard. How to playground a running track, which one in a circle around the park itself and the tennis court and everywhere else around worth the trees so far in the running track gave a very convincing impression of being in a forest, away from civilization. Michael Worker and I were to start our shift in the park at 7 p.m. and it would end at 7 a.m. There was a tiny guardhouse near the entrance which we could spend most of our 2 hours. We would go patrolling around the park very strictly following the running track where the path was illuminated when we ever give it a heavy-duty flashlight. This one night I was doing my rounds around the park when all of a sudden I heard my partner's voice. He simply shot at it. "Hey, help me." From a distance I couldn't tell where it was coming from, so I called it to him, moving my beam across the trees beyond the path. Now the light that we were giving is able to penetrate darkness so well that you could see it at least 100 meters in front of you. But when illuminated the area my partner's voice was coming from, his cries for help were on a loop, always saying the same thing, the same invitation and the same length. Deposit is not even looked at my watch and sure enough I was right. Call for help, 8-second pause. Call for help 8 seconds ago. And then realized how suddenly quiet everything lies, usually the park, with someone loud at night, crickets hours doing my best not to sprint on my partner's looping cries for help, her sister almost halfway until I was back at the yard house. When I find they did get back, nice and special was confirmed in my partner was there visibly confused at what I just told him. He called up HQ to report suspicious activity and no less than 5 minutes of vehicle pulled up to the entrance and intervention sending case of emergencies. I was questioned by the team leader for the next hour, while the others went to the scene where I had heard the voice and my co-worker, my partner, and I were escorted out of the place, and the following morning we were told that the part contract was avoided by the company and we no longer needed to go there. Now I don't know anything else, though, because right after I returned to my original post and back at NICE spoke to a former intervention unit member who would work for a company for over 5 years. He said that some of the stuff you had seen was unimaginable and he was willing to share some with me. For instance, this one time they got a call from a residential building that they were securing it, that there were strange noises coming from one of the rooms. The team arrived in the scene in question. The guard he would reported the incident. Apparently his job was to make sure that no one entered home 416. Can you explain that? The room itself was unoccupied, but the noises would be heard constantly between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Usually those noises would include a child of giggling, a loud footsteps, bouncing off something on the floor and so on, and the residents learned to ignore the noises. But this one old lady, Mrs. Rogers. Now the intervention unit was told not to then after anyone after 20 minutes have passed, but they still had time, so they rushed to the room. The guy who was telling me that said that as they approached the room they heard voices like a group of people trying to talk in a hushed tone. They explained that it sounded like kids in school when they're trying to whisper unintentionally loud enough for others to hear as soon as they had touched the door. Now the voices all stopped in unison, not like the conversation, like literally as if someone had pressed the mute button in the middle of a sentence. They burst inside the empty room which looked like no one stepped inside for a year as a weapons raised. No one was there, and as they're standing there completely silent, they hear a barely audible wheezing sound from above. They all look up and, as they do, they freeze. The guy who told me this said that, "What do you smell?" So he keeps him up at night sometimes. Mrs. Rogers was standing in the ceiling like a spider on all fours, craning her neck so much they thought her neck was broken, and she was looking directly at the unit upside down, wide-eyed, if it was occasionally dropping for her mouth to the floor as she was wheezing her fingers at somehow mutated in a long claws, and then, without any warning, and Mrs. Rogers and managed to jump down on one of the team members, and he blink of an eye and gunshots ensued. He said that by the time they were done shooting, 2 more members were down in. Mrs. Rogers had hundreds of bullet holes in her body and was no longer moving. He had encountered as some of those scenarios after that, but never came so close to dying again. The building residents were evacuated from the building and death end of the next day, and the official story given was that there was toxic fungi located within the building. The final story that we'll share is going to be the one I was told. The very strict rules that they had to follow her first off, and there were 10 guards in total in each shift. In each of them were assigned to a classroom. Their job was to count all the students after the classes were over, here should any of the students go missing. And they already call HQ immediately. And now comes the word part. One day the guardian told me the story, and all the kids in class and the 32 recalled 33 students were in the classroom. They couldn't tell you who the extra student is, even when the guard was watching them like a hawk to make sure none of them would sneak to the group of caught on kids while they weren't looking, baffled and unsure of what to do with. The guy tells the teacher to keep an eye on them while he contacts HQ. I already feeling silly for contacting the higher UPS over an extra students rather than a missing one. He expected HQ to scold him for calling about something like that. But when he says that he is an extra student who just popped up chocolate at the Saturday of the situation, the person on the other end of the line, son, and the ghost island. She asked him to repeat what he had said, and when he does, the woman tells him to get the teacher out of there, lock the classroom immediately, and radio everyone else to do the same at once. He does so, and only a minute later the intervention unit arrives escorting the guards out of there. He said that he had no idea what happened next, but when he returned to the school next day for a shaft, everything seemed to be normal. No one really knows what the company is doing with your. Not even intervention was told what these encounters are, and since it seems to be a very strict need-to-know basis. One thing is for sure, though, when I hear some of these stories from other guards, I realize how lucky I got to run into some of these creatures and live to tell the tale. I want to start up by clarifying one thing before. The company I work for is not the SCP. I know there are a lot of similarities between the encounters which I described in some of the SCP files. My company has nothing to do with that. We are, just as I had stated before, a standalone security company that provides a technical security surveillance and the physical protection services to clients. Now I'm going to begin this post with a story that still runs chills down my spine. While I was stationed at an office complex is similar to the ones in HQ, where I am now. I had a number of. A strange experience is our job was mostly staying in our guardhouse and conducting mandatory patrols around the complex, at the start and at the end of the shaft, and taking one side while I took the other a few months back. I came to my shift as usual with my partner, so on that day we placed our initial patrol and returned back to the yard house, and we usually talk to pass the time, but this time you seemed unapproachable and quiet, so I figured I should leave him alone and continue to read my book for the time being. My shift was almost over when we decided to do our final sweep, so we split up to do our rounds. After I was done, I came back, but my partner wasn't there. I figured he wasn't done with his sleep yet, so I did off and continue passing the time. When he wasn't back in over 30 minutes though, I radioed him. No response. He wasn't nowhere in the cameras either, figuring that he may be in trouble. I went out to search for him, frustrated that he wasn't back, and it was almost the end of her shaft patrol and I see him in the distance across the parking lot, turned away from me and looking at something. And I called out his name and he turned around. I waved too, I'm telling him to get back, and he went back to me. I took it as a signal that he understood what I had said and he returned to the guardhouse. The guys from the next shift were already there and I went home tell him that my partner would do the debriefing. Not 2 hours later I got a phone call from the same guys. They told me my partner never showed up, so they wouldn't looking for him, thinking that something may have been wrong. Sure, he was found dead and I was shocked to see the least. I asked them when he died and how, and since I had seen him literally minutes before they had arrived and they told me that it was impossible for me to have seen him, I asked him why, and the answer to give me chilled me to the bone. Apparently he died about 10 hours ago and the camera recording said he was seen wandering off play into the garage and then I never seen coming out. One of the guys discovered his body there. No visible wounds or marks and HQ recovered his body yet, but Sheridan, no details about the cause of his death. So that begs the question, if he died 10 hours ago, who did I see in that parking lot tomorrow for 10 hours between patrols, and then that same what is in addition to our patrol around the complex, and we also had to check inside of buildings and make sure that everything was alright. So one time on my shift I'm in one of the office buildings doing my sweep on the second floor and I move to the stairs to get to the next floor. I climb up and as I do I see that the sign in the wall says a second floor. Again, I just miss it. I thinking that I must have been the first floor prior to this and I just got confused. Give up one floor in a gallon of the sign says second floor and I stare at the side embattlement and decide to try the door. What? I climb up one more floor and again I'm on the second floor and I knew about this point that something was wrong. I mean, the building itself is only 3 floors and I already climbed at least 4. I decided to send the stairs as fast as I could, but every time I passed by the floor side and before I ran until I was exhausted, and doors along the way, all of which were light, and I leaned over the railing to look down the stairs and I saw these staircase going down infinitely into a bear's, same for the above high radio in my partner, but there was no response, no signal on the phone either. I decided to sit down and think about everything I already have accepted. My impending, to my eyes must have been hours there that I sat and groaned on the stairs and, admittedly, here when I saw it in the air, the sound of the door opening below, and I was so relieved to actually hear something besides my own footsteps and that I didn't even think about the potential dangers that I might entail. I rushed down into my relief. I saw these signs before 1 o'clock, the door open as I left it. When I had entered the building, I bolted out of there and straight to the yard house. A bargain the door. My co-worker was there reading the newspaper, only shooting me a glass before returning to his reading. When I accused him of not answering his radio, confused stating that you never got a call from me. I asked him why he had to look for me when I hadn't returned in hours. And again he was confused, glanced at his watching them to me and simply said, "You've been gone for 5 minutes. HQ. I should have. I drew ready to risk my life for my partner and just as I was about to enter I heard his voice behind me and calling my name. I turned around and, sure enough, there was looking back at the building and the cries from the person in the building, and it stopped completely. The co-worker confirmed that it wasn't him who was in the building and as I turned back to the source of the voice, I could only mutter myself, "You sneaky son of a one." What happened to one of the other guys during one of the shifts I still puts me on edge. This guy named Chris was in the guardhouse with his partner and partner decided to go for a patroller there. Chris continued reading his book as the partner left the place. 1 minute later you're at the door, shut behind and then, at the thought of his footsteps of his partner inside, forgot something. Haha, he had asked and not looking for a spot. The partner put his hand on his shoulder and Chris is staring at the window at the reflection of the figure standing behind him and he says that he felt a grip on his shoulder tightening, bracing himself as well as he could. He swiftly turned around and drawing his gun and pointing it at nothing. No one was there. Then I checked the record. Lights of the camera feed in the garden house and sure enough no one was there with him. Now I can see Chris and the cameras setting up visibly becoming in, turning around with this gun drawn before her, looking around and finally holstering the weapon. You look like a crazy person from this angle. I never figured what that was or the other occurrence is in the complex, but HQ issued new orders shortly after the guards over on the shift were to stay together at all times, even patrolling in Paris and communicating via coincidences every 30 minutes, to ensure their partner wasn't an imposter. And Chris told me of another incident that he had during one of his shifts. And he said that he saw someone suspicious on camera in front of one of the offices way after working hours. So we went to investigate halfway through. The partner radioed him and said he lost the person out of sight. It was strange, though, because apparently he only turned around for 1 second turn. The camera was gone. However, he said he thought he noticed a movement on the camera which overlooked the windows of the office from the outside. He said it was on the 2nd floor. Chris decided to investigate it. Now he's doing a sweep of the 2nd floor. His partner radios him again halfway in his patrol and asks him if he had found anyone. Chris says no, ask him if he sees anything on camera. The partner says no, and then he pauses me, Chris, that he should come back to the guardhouse. And Chris wanted to finish the sleep, but the partner insisted he comes back to the guardhouse. At once, frustrated, he returned and asked him what was wrong. You really didn't see anyone in there? The partner asked when Chris play window with the flashlight, and he tells them to pay close attention, and Chris wasn't alone there when is being flashed across the window and caught us to the woods staring at the camera. The next few seconds of the recording were spent by him talking to his partner on the radio, and in addition to the window so the wet there was no a person standing directly behind him. As Chris moved through the room, more people became visible in the room, all while he was completely oblivious to their presence. After that he saw himself exit in the building while the people in the building were disappearing, or more like blending in with the darkness. No, overall, I've worked in various messed up places, but this one seems to be the most dangerous and aggressive. One was even HQ, not being able to predict some of the things. There are more stories to share, but I'll post them on other time. If any of you know of anyone who has similar experiences to mine is a security guard, chances are we work for the same company here. I know a lot of you guys have been eager to see an update, but I've been too busy with words to update more frequently. I'll try to update more often anyway. Here I am with some more stories from my company. The first story I'm going to tell you was about a big office building that our company has a contract with. I never personally worked there, but some of the guys I know that one of the guards told me about the place in more detail. Apparently it's a normal office building where people were okay, regular 9-to-5 job, but our guards need to be there 24/7, from around 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. until all the employees leave. It's pretty leisure. However, the guards and the employees have one very strict rule to follow. The building has no doors, including the one at the entrance. So at first glance, do you like really strange to see all these offices of bathrooms with a naked door, frames after the employees leave, and guards there to conduct patrols every hour until the end of the shift, and they have to make sure all the door frames have no doors, and should they spot an actual door anywhere on the premise that they didn't make sure that it is enclosed. If the door was open, or at least 11 o'clock, the guards would need to put one of those door holders on the ground to prevent the door from closing. The guards would carry a bunch of door holders on patrol on just for this purpose. If the door was closed, however, they were ordered and not to go near it under any circumstances, and they also had a map of the building, and I had to memorize where each room was, making sure that the layout of the rooms was exactly how it was on the map, including the direction of the office desk and the furniture, told me. This shirt is on experience, dance with me. He said that everything was calm for the first few months, and then, during one of his night shift patrols, he ran into a door on the second floor which was slightly ajar. He could see an office space behind the door, and, following the instructions, he pulled out his door holder and went to put it in front of the door. However, as he did so, he apparently had stumbled forward and actually pushed the door, which shot with a loud clock, opening the door open that no one would notice. But he says that when he opened it too, the office was no longer there. He was instead of looking at the bathroom. He thought that he was in the wrong place at first, because there is no way that the bathroom could even be there. So he double checked. Sure enough, he was right. The office space he initially saw was supposed to be there. So he closed the door and opened it again. This time he was staring at the kitchen and fascinated by the whole thing. You have to closing and opening the door over and over here, seeing all the different rooms from the building. He said that he would have gone on some more, but his partner radio closing and opening the door for a few more minutes until he finally saw that same office again, and he placed the door holder on the floor and bolted back to the security room. He reported the appearance of the door to HQ, leaving out the details about closing and opening at. Everything was fine that night, but the following morning he was called by his boss, who asked him what the heck he was thinking and closing the door like that. The guard was confused. Some of the rooms had shifted around and now the entire office building was completely jumbled up. No one was harmed and nothing really happened, other than that, say, for the only inconvenience being the workers having to make their trip from the third floor all the way down to the ground floor to use the bathroom. Me continue working there, but never saw another door there again. One specific story which stands out for me: security in a residential house between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. The owner is a married couple, live there, and they would have leave the house every night at 8 p.m. and the guard it was appointed was told by the owners that the duties are fairly simple. HQ briefed the god before I started working by giving him a list of rules to follow up. Here's the transcript of the written rules. At 9 p.m., however, make sure you're there at least an hour earlier before leaving your home for a duty to take a sharp object and leave it inside your home near the exit. For instance, on the shoe stand many sharp object will do. However, have you sharpen the better, preferably something that can easily puncture your skin, if you can make it at least 30 minutes before 9 p.m. to the house. Where are you perform your duty here? Inform HQ and skip your shaft. Do not attempt to enter the house at her after 9 p.m. under any circumstances. Once, follow these rules carefully. 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., you can move freely throughout the house, with the exception of entering the basement. 10 p.m. to 11 p.m., stand the living room during this entire hour. Do not leave the room under any circumstances. Don't leave the house either. If you need to use the bathroom, use a bottle or any other means. I love him. PM to 11:23 p.m., you will hear someone knocking. You may turn on the TV for distraction. 11:23 p.m. to 12 a.m., then I can stop by now, but you may not hear children crying upstairs. Ignore her head too. No children reside in the house. 12 a.m. to 12:25 a.m., you may not move freely around the first floor of the house, although it is advised you stay in the living room and the kitchen and prepare for the next stop. 12:25 a.m. to 12:30 a.m., below the sink in the kitchen is a bucket full of fresh meat. Take it to the basement. You do not need to add to the basement. You can simply leave the bucket near the door inside, but make sure to close and lock the door. Again, a very important thing to note here: make sure that you do not smell the drop any blood or meat from the bucket on the floor. Is there anywhere outside of the basement, since it can accurately smell blood up to a mile away? If you happen to spill any blood, do not bother cleaning. Simply follow the next step. 12:30 a.m. to 1 a.m., you may hear growling noises coming from the basement, but do not bother investigating it. If you have previously spilled any blood around the house, do not bother cleaning up and instead sit on the couch, turn on the TV and turn. Lower the volume to the maximum, cover your ears with your hands and keep your eyes at friendly shot. Face the ground and stay in this position until 1 a.m. If there's a pause on the TV for more than a few seconds, try to produce any loud sound of your own by screaming or speaking loudly to drown out any unnatural noises. You may hear her. 1 a.m. to 2 a.m., you may freely move throughout the entire house again and the basement excluded. This is the time to use for bathroom. Do not attempt to leave the house. You should also use this time to memorize the room layouts the furniture is. Specifically during this hour you may hear a voice coming from the bedroom on the second floor. If you do investigate, If there's a man in the room, lock the door and return to the living room immediately. Do not attempt to talk to the man. If the room is empty yet, you may continue to move freely. 2 a.m. to 3:33 a.m. Nothing major will happen during the shower here. Ignore any ringing on the phone and do not pick it up, no matter how much it rains. 3:33 a.m. to 3:55 a.m. Now is the time to take stock of all the furniture in the house. If you see any extra furnishing, do not sit on it or touch it in any way. You will start to feel extremely sleepy by this point. Whatever you do, you must not fall asleep. It is recommended you spend this time in the kitchen. Can I leave the sink water running so you can splash your face whenever your eyelids become too heavy? At 3:55 a.m. to 4 a.m., the owners will have returned by now. Before leaving, make sure to say a lot of the sentence, "My duty is finished," not that if you do or do not do it upon entry into your home, you will find that you were back in the house of the owners. Should this be the case, then you only have one option: take these sharp objects you love, close to the door suddenly coming down with a fever severe enough to stop them from moving, and etc. One guy even tried calling his friend to pick him up with a friend ended up getting lost in the woods. Another guy tried leaving despite the effect snowstorm, but as he tracked through the snow he ended up right back at the house. He claims that there was no way he could have been back there, since he went straight and yet there was all these guards and ready to take over here in case someone fails to show up for their own should have to. And the garden was previously there, is stranded and they still don't know how the lodge works or why anyone has to be there. But all they do know is that one person always has to be there, and he even stranger things. No one in HQ knows how and when they signed a contract for this place. Whoever the client is, he's sending payments to the company every month and is impossible to track down. Well, that's it for now. I'll update you guys again in a few days, since there's a bunch of more stories to share. One of the guards told me that he worked in a residential building. In the building itself is normal, but in the basement of the building was a big round hole. No one knew how. I got there and the residents said that they just woke up to find it there one day. The old lady who discovered it almost died when she went to retrieve her bicycle. There he is. Surveys and research teams were sent to investigate the hole. No equipment could determine where the bottom line is. Electronics would either stop working at a certain job, throwing something inside produced and no sound of impact, and chemical lights got swallowed by the darkness. They sent one crew member down there, but after about 10 minutes of defending he stopped responding and they pulled him out as fast as they could, but he was gone. All that was left of him was the pile of clothes that he was wearing that still attached to the safe to get in the row hubs. The company was appointed to stand guard in front of the basement and not let anyone in the garden work there, and he told me the job was pretty leisure most nights, except that he was bored and then one night heard something coming from inside the basement. Sounded like somebody calling his name. At first he thought it was his imagination, but the more you listened the more I became convinced it was his sister. And despite getting instruction news from HQ not to go near the hole, mostly due to the possibility of a slipping and falling, and he opened the door, sure enough, a third was, his sister's voice calling him right from the hole, clear as day. He asked her how she got there and if she was okay, and she perfectly said that everything was fine. She has the money to come down there so they could talk. And she talked in such a way that he became suspicious of the whole situation, cast him again to come down and Andrew refused. Telling her that he would call help, which his sister, became increase in the agitated and angry. She and the man that he come down there and help her and he didn't budge. And his sister said that he would let her die there, just like he let their father die. and he froze to this and his sister other days. Single sentence which made and he run out of there, and yeah, life is nothing but a pilot. Those were his father's last words before he took his own life in front of Andy. Andy bolted out of the building listening to his sister calling after him and begging him to come down, and he called HQ telling him that he was never going back and he was assigned to a different post and never had a problem again. The really weird thing about this whole experience was that no one but Andy knew what his father's last words were, never told anyone that he watched him turn the gun. Injustice talked to the story that he found him dead, but the word is of all things was the fact that his sister had died in a tragic car accident 4 years before he ever saw that hole. The basement was like to type the afterwards, and guards continued working there, but they all reported the same thing, voices of their loved ones calling from the hole and always asking the one the same thing, to come down. The intervention news story I shared in one of the earlier updates told me another one recently which chilled me to the bone. He and his unit was stationed at a long since abandoned hotel and they would get to do whatever they wanted in the hotel. But exactly 4:25 a.m., they do assemble at the reception desk and their job was to sweep the area for any suspicious activity, and the guy who told me this at HQ never told him or what they were looking for, but they were ordered to shoot, play the pain. Seen anyone besides the unit members in the hotel? They've been sweeping the hotel for 4 nights in a row, at exactly 4:30 a.m. until 5 a.m., but never found traces of anyone, and then on the 5th night, as they checked the 2nd floor, the commander of the unit ordered them to stop and be quiet. There is a sound of muffled giggling coming from somewhere on the floor. Strangely, though, as they listened, the giggling was always the same intonation, Google 5 seconds pause. And giggle 5 seconds pause. He described it as an adult. I tried to impersonate a child's Google carefully at the unit, followed the sound to one of the rooms, and as they stood in front of the door, the giggling became louder and more frequent. The universe inside the room and pointed the gun at the source of the sound. Facing the window was a tall person. Except it wasn't a person. Described the creature, a very round face which contrasted its impossibly thin body. It had extremely long arms and legs and it was so inhumanly tall that it had to hunch over and bend its knees in order to avoid touching the ceiling again, and it still sounded muffled, just as a dead behind a closed door. The units to there was their guns, pointed at this thing as the creature giggled once more before going silent, and then it slowly started to turn around and locked eyes with the units. The creature apparently had a green tooth around face with large unblinking eyes, and this I took the unit aback so much that they froze. Hey, Google. Luckily the giggler, as he was little by, the intervention unit never managed to reach them and fell backwards as soon as the forest of the bullets connected with it as it lay there in the ground and apparently kept giggling some more. But the sun became a slower and more quiet until it completely stopped, leaving the creature dead with its screening face and never changing. Who told them that their mission was complete and they had no longer needed to stay in the hotel? The intervention guy concluded that 2 of the unit members I took their own lives within 2 months after the mission. In their farewell notes they said that they can no longer stand to listen to the giggling at night. Recently I was transferred to the operator's room in HQ. Essentially, I would sit in a room with a lady who served his back for various guards who found themselves in situations they couldn't resolve. Most of these situations where your run-of-the-mill cases regards had, drugs, trespassing or being sure if they could investigate certain sounds and so on. There is only one call that I witnessed which has set out for me. It was late night and we got in a call from a garden station. Where is the transcript of the conversation? This is HQ. What's your situation? Yeah, this is Mark from the Spencer Farmer. There's a guy standing in front of the bar and then I can see him on the camera. Alright, He's been standing there for 2 hours now, and I first thought the camera was frozen movie, and 5 minutes later we hear the guard's voice over the call. Can you hear me? There is a moment of silence. What's going on over there? He isn't responding, is getting more and more violent. I think something's wrong with him and get him off the property. I'm going to have to ask you to. There was a loud scream coming from the guard. The operator pressed him to respond to 10 minutes. Mark, can you get somewhere safe? Backup will be there in 10 o'clock, but I need you to hide. Can you do that? I'm inside the locker. He's standing just outside the security Bahama. Something's wrong with his face. What do you mean? It's all wrong. It's like it's sideways. His head is normal and all, but his eyes, his nose and mouth, I think he's calling my place son of the, became more violent than that. He's dreaded, screaming, and begging for his life. The call landed in the operator and I stared at each other in disbelief. The intervention team arrived in the same soon. There was no trace of Mark or the man that attacked him. The camera feed it showed Mark approaching the man, who then turned around to face the guard, and then Mark running back to the security room. From that the man followed to the security problem, taking slow one, steady stops, Mike was never found a gun. My next story is going to be from another intervention unit number here. And he was stationed at some experimental facility and didn't want to share any details about its location or nature of the experiment because, as he said, more than his job would be at stake. And he's been about 5 months there with his unit and never saw any action the regular, which pertained to not getting into any kind of physical contact with civilians, and their main objective, in the worst case scenario, was to seal off all lights. And sure enough, for one day, an alarm pause in the facility in tennis team, get ready to start the mission. As they made their way through the facility here, they ran into various scientists and other staff members that were deceased. And then they ran into a survivor, a researcher. All bloody and scared, he raised his hands and begged him not to shoot, while the units just kept barking orders at him to keep his distance. The rear surgery kept saying that he's not infected, whatever that meant. And does you still there? And everyone? All of a sudden, he's not all the shilling rows of sharp teeth, which were not there a second ago. And then he launched for an attacking one unit member and sneaking his teeth into his face, and the guy told me they started shooting long before he even launched. But it was as if the researcher didn't even react to the bullets. He was riddled with holes and blood. But I just kept a bit until he finally over. He tried to locking the potential survivors inside. They contacted HQ and a bunch of other vehicles with military personnel and hazmat suit showed up. The unit was dismissed from the facility in one to not talk about any sensitive details related to the garment, the names of staff members and so on, no matter how much I pressed it, and he refused to tell me more. The final story in this post which I'm going to share is from a garden in Tom, who worked in an office building before we got sent to work. HQ gave him a 1 week. It was strictly forbidden from talking to making any kind of working in the office. Communication with his partner by talking was forbidden. It's been a while since my last update, so I apologize for that. I've been busy with work lately and I've been unable to post here. With that in mind, I have some good stories to share for today. One of the guys from my company named Gary was outsourced to a small secret of organization for a short project. The details of the projects were undisclosed, but the Guardian volunteered for this job had to stay in a remote facility close to a small town for 1 month. Now, the organization was pretty shady, since they had military personnel, garden facility, and scientists running around, which raised the question of whether a guard was even needed there. Immediately upon arrival, the superior is explained his duties to me in the guard was free to do anything you wanted all day, but once a day at lunchtime he would need to distribute candy to everyone in the facility and make sure that they ate it, everyone, including himself. He was to make sure the mint was ingested by inspecting each individual's mouth upon swallowing anyone who refused, and was to be reported to the superiors. Gary laughed at this initially, about when the superior is assured I'm at. This task is of the utmost importance, any better than a screw around, and Gary followed the rules and made sure to have everyone eat mint every day. What you caused him to be shunned by the project participants, since no one knew what they had to do, it towards the end of complaining about frequent headaches, and those same people were later exposed as ones who didn't ingest the mint properly. They were detained for insubordination. Something else happened in the meantime, however, and the company lost contact with the facility among all people, and Gary managed to contact the company with a simple text message that said, "Something's wrong. Send help now." An intervention unit was dispatched straight away, but it would be 3 days until they reached the remote area before they did. However, HQ continued to try to contact Gary in the facility asking what had happened. After days of radio silence, they only got a short text, "Everything okay?" Money intervention unit arrived. Everyone at the facility was data and details were undisclosed. There was a security guard in our company who primarily worked as a driver. His job was to transport to company-related equipment like weapons, cameras, uniforms, etc. from one facility to another. Now this sounds like a normal day-to-day job, right? Wrong. As the driver, he took a route to 2000 and saved a lot of time, but he had a bunch of rules that he had to follow before he was hired. He had a simulation of the drive in order to do not stop for any hitchhikers under any circumstances, even if they are in fatal trouble. If you see headlights suddenly appearing behind you or speed up, ignore any sound from the back of the vehicle. You might hear head banging, growling, or clad right now. Don't stare at the rear view mirror for longer than 3 seconds at a time. If you see something running along with your vehicle on the side of the road, ignore it, no matter how close it is. In speed up, it should disappear within 5 minutes. If your vehicle's engine suddenly dies, close your eyes and try to stay calm and start the engine again. If not, I need to happen on the windows and do not look at them. Once you go over the yellow line in the road, which is 24 miles from the starting point, you're in the clear. And despite seeing all of this in the past few years of his work, he says that open trader's job for anything in the world. A guy named Ethan told me about his experience working in the morgue. Now working in a mortgage, as bad enough as it is, but working in one outsourced to my company and is even worse. His job was to take over once these staff were done there at 10 p.m. and just to make sure that no one got in or out. After only a month period, he says the company allowed him to do whatever you want on there, including slave. However, it was inadvised and you'll understand why in a moment. He said that on a good night he would hear people screaming from the body chamber as a begging to be let out and that they were placed there by mistake. While there was no strict rule about opening the chamber as it would probably be nerve-wracking to do so. The problem was that once the body started screaming, the only way to stop them was to pull out the chamber. Immediately upon coming into view, Ethan would be faced with the call "Dad, on moving body here," and silence would return to the room. He said that often when reading something or getting sleepy, he'd feel the strong grip on his shoulder here, a lot of boo in his ear. Never be anything around that one, but you can see why I sleep in there would be impossible. He would often see a what? He said that he had been working there for about 2 months before things got weird. Not the start of each shift he would meet up with his partner and they would take turns patrolling. The first month his partner kept complaining of severe insomnia and fatigue, and then one day he just came to work completely freeze. That he may have been looking at another person was such a sudden change, and that working area was pretty desolate and HQ would rarely contact them. They would just have them to submit weekly reports and that's it. But 2 months after this guy starts working there, HQ contacted the guy and told him to bear working alone for just a few more nights, since there was a new car on the way. The guy, "What do you mean? Just a few more nights? I already have a partner here." HQ went silent for a moment before saying that his partner was found dead at his home a month ago. As soon as they told him that, as if I'm cute, he stopped seeing his partner altogether. He said that he saw a change of at least 5 more guards, and the following year one veteran guard told me about the time that he spent and guarding a mansion. The mansion itself supposedly belonged to a late rich man in his family who was trying to sell the place, but apparently no one wanted it, even though it was a practically dirt cheap. The guy who told me the story had been there for almost a year before he had got a new partner, a rookie who would just join the company. Apparently there were no rules or anything like that, except for one: don't open any doors. Hello, long story short. During the patrol on the play Florida, Georgia, little girl crying. Now I don't know if he stopped to think rationally for a moment or if his hero instincts in, but he decided to check it out, and just a quick peek. The Sabbath was coming from one of the rooms on the left, so carefully and quietly. He turned the knob and he opened the door. As soon as he did, the crying stopped. Not like somebody had heard him and then stopped crying. No, it was like somebody had pressed him. Mute button right, shut off anyway. He poked his head in and saw nothing. So he went back to his patrol. Not a minute later, hears the crying again, once more from the left, but a different realm. He checks it out again and once more at the crying stuff. He continues his patrol and just then realizes that the corridor is on loop and you can use walking through it open, that it's just a really long corridor, but he doesn't steps, or so that he takes the crying fathers and then one of the rooms in the last half too. He tries running back, but again it was crying on the left in the corridor, goes on for much longer than he remembers walking. He continues fully aware that he should have been out by now, but the exit is nowhere inside. He was now in a full-blown panic, so he contacted his partner via radio telling him that he messed up. When the veteran asked him how in, the rookie told him that the corridor is on a loop. The only thing the veteran guard was able to modernize. Oh crap. A moment of silence, and soon before the veteran said, "You opened the door, didn't you? I told you not to open any doors. What the heck were you thinking? Alright, listen, just walk forward and don't run. Just walk and don't turn around," and he sounds behind you. Just to keep walking. You got it? Just pretend that you're on patrol and ignore anything you see or hear, but if you see the crying, you turn around and you run for your life. You got it. In the next few minutes, for a mixture of a deadly silence into eager anticipation. In 10 minutes later, though, the rookie stumbles into the security room, pale as a sheet of paper, but alive. He was unable to speak properly due to the drama, but was uninjured. The veteran called the medical team and they escorted out of there, and you never came back to that place again. Whether he was fired or decided to quit, we never found out. Back when I worked in one of the office buildings that our company guards, I had a partner on duty. It would help me in my patrols, since the building was too big. Usually we would divide patrols, with one of us starting from the top floor and moving down and the other guard going from the bottom up until we met on Florida for time to make things interesting, and we made it like a race. So this one time I started from the bottom. He said that he had got tired of waiting downstairs and decided to make his way down and to do my work for me. I found it out that he had got there so quickly, since he would usually take his time checking every nook and cranny, but dismissed. It is unimportant. There was something else off here, that one, but I couldn't put my finger on it. All I know is that I suddenly got a really bad feeling and that the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight again. I just missed it as my imagination. He suggested that we return downstairs and head outside so that he could have a quick smoke. I told him that we were forbidden from doing so, but he said that he would be quick, 2 minutes tops. When we were about to make our way down, when I heard a voice shot from upstairs, "I'm running late tonight, are we here?" It was my partner's voice. I stared in my partner in front of me, who looked equally scared and begged me not to go there and that the voice was faked. It was then that I realized what was so wrong with the person in front of me. He had completely black eyes, and I remember thinking how the heck I didn't notice that before her, and I bolted upstairs 4 times, was there visibly confused by my state. I explained what happened to him when we went downstairs is the imposter was gone when we spoke to HQ about it a bit later. And here's what the chief said: he ever heard of those black-eyed kids? My partner and I shook her head, and the chief continued to all. Apparently there are these kids with black eyes. Then knock on your door and ask you to let them in. You're not in any danger so long as you decline their invitation. In that building off of a black eye, they usually ask you to go outside with them. So our assumption is that they want to get out, but they can't do it without permission or an escort. That's why you're not allowed outside during your shift. So what if we let them out? It's all the chief said. Another place my company has a contract with is a big botanical garden carrier flamethrower with UN to kill anything found on the trails. That includes squatters, stray animals, etc. But the biggest concern with the plan is the guards were told that if they so much as hears something or see a stray root or branch on the trail, unleashed until everything is still again. Each section of plants was separated in the way that flames can spread. The story was one of the former guards who retired recently. You said that he had spent about 10 years working there and had seen all sorts of strange things. The most commonly he would just have to burn the plants that have grown over the trail. He said that often he would see a tiny piece of wood sticking towards the trail, and 2 hours later on his patrol, overgrown and green tendrils would cover the place. He said the tantrums would rise and there would be a hiss of some sorts that sounded like the plant was screaming in pain. Me and his career. On one day here a straight handle wrapped itself around his ankle and started dragging him off the trailer, and he had managed to burn the tundra off. But a sharp thorn had found itself in his foot and he plucked it out and continued working. But the following day he had bulging veins all over his foot. Upon closer inspection he realized those weren't veins. The tiny tendrils emerging from the wound were the Thornton, and slowly growing and reaching survivor. Apparently he's been on dozens of missions and saw a change of 414 teams, being the sole survivor on the squad of every mission. When I met him he turned out not to be the burly, bald, scarred and tough guy that I had imagined. Instead he looked like your average Joe, athletic build, a kind eyes, approachable personality. He lit a cigarette as he told me a story about one of those black-eyed people the while ago. Good thing you didn't make the same mistake that one guard made a few years back and let them out. They're nasty when they get off their leashes. So about that story. A few years back we got a call from HQ to immediately go to the site where you weren't and investigate. When we got there the higher UPS were already there questioning the guard, more like interrogating. The guard was in a panic stage, rambling about his partner having black eyes, and his partner was right there that they have black eyes. Look for some reason until it's too late. So apparently they went out and the black-eyed man just smiled and thanked God for escorting them to the exit before walking away. The rules were never to go out during shift, of course. So the guard was put into disciplinary and we were sent to go after the escape entity. Just an hour later we got into that he was in a nearby motel. This was bad for us because what happens is those things feed on other people, suck the life out of you and get stronger while you live out the rest of your days as a vegetable oil, and I only hope that the thing hadn't attacked anyone before we had arrived. The receptionist was, just as panicked as the garden called the cops. So that's how the company found the target. We evacuated everyone under the excuse that there is a dangerous criminal in one of the rooms, and we went upstairs, then negotiate or not open the door, representing himself as an employee of the motel and asking him to open the door. But you see, the thing is these guys are not so dangerous if you can get them to open the door willing to you, but if they don't, well, let's just say that sending an arm and vehicle against them and I still poses a threat to the driver. So anyway, the guy on the other side of the door answer is asking who it is, and he sounds like a normal human male, nothing suspicious. But after a moment of debating, besides that he wants to be left alone, he was probably suspicious and he knew that someone would go after him anyway. The negotiator steps back. We break the door down forcefully and throw in a tear gas grenade. The tear gas itself is so strong that no one could take even a whiff of it without being affected. One of my former unit members had a faulty gas mask and just started vomiting just 2 seconds. Pointing guns at the guy who looked exactly like the guy that we saw earlier, has saved for the black guys as he's just standing there staring at us through the gas, then used it on affected black guys reflecting from our flashlights. Without thinking we open fire and he flinches at the bullets pierced his body, but he continues standing and then he opens his mouth so wildly. That is John hinges in his lips and tear at the edges all the way to the ears. There is a row of spikes and some spin these spider like a package that grow out of its back with a lot of bone cracking and gurgling sound when we keep firing. But the thing impales our men, one by one with those spider legs in seconds. Only 2 of us remained and the thing grabbed the other guy and bit his head off whole like it was no more than a piece of tender meat. Somehow I found myself in the ground and without ammo before I could do whatever I wanted to me. And then more gunshots from the armored guys and the thing and jumped out the window. I quickly got up and the guy stopped shooting and went for the ones I want, but it was already on the other side of the street scurrying with its spider legs. So quickly here that I thought to myself, holy crap, I'm lucky to be alive. The commander of the armored units has simply approached me inside out. Surprise, surprise, survivor survives. The black-eyed creature was located weeks later in a remote village where it had been killing its people one by one and secrets, only getting stronger than the team that was dispatched to kill. It was ordered to keep things quiet, but I doubt that was the case with all the explosives and firepower that they used, and they practically had to use anti-missiles to kill it anyway. And they finally did take the thing out, and not before it took down 2 more of our, and that's that. He finished his sick by now. So we let another one. I remember being amazed at all call me wise talking about his and your death experience at the hands of this monster. And do any of your experiences from past missions ever haunt you? I asked. He shook his head. No, if you let it get you in this line of work, you don't last for long. A new recruits. I joined our company recently. What station do the park? For a while the place was really traversed by people even during daytime. Dangerous trails, and stories about the place being haunted. The rookie told me about his time there, and while on most nights he said he would see nothing, there were occasions where he would poop his pants. For instance, when patrolling it was a common rule, the guards should never walk off trail, the rookie said. The first time something happened it was like this, and he was walking on the trail and it was all when you heard bare footsteps on crunchy leaves in the dark, and he stopped and pointed his flashlight but nothing was there. He took a few more stops and again more footsteps, and the sound of leaves shuffling came from behind him. He turned around again and saw nothing, but then, as he moved his flashlight to the right, he saw something that looked like an emaciated disappearing into. He looked like he had been in the wilderness without food and water for a while and was on the verge of dying. They stared at each other for a while, and then she opened her mouth and started screaming in it, except it wasn't really screaming but more of a croaking sound, as if the woman who lost her voice. And the rookie fired a few shots and started running, and for a good 5 minutes, and never going quiet or louder. He said it was as if she was maintaining the same distance from him the entire time. She didn't stop, even once, to breathe, and during this entire time, but instead I just continued croaking continuously. Just before he had reached the guard house, the crooked was hurt. Before it stopped completely, people were gone, and he was saying the rest of the night was, he seems, determined to continue working, and he was transferred from the place recently. So now he works, and I'm going to relax an environment, if you could call that. From time to time he wakes up at 9:20 around now. There used to be a guard at work in a factory. There are no exception rules except don't let anyone in without an idiot. Don't go inside of the working grounds unless absolutely necessary. The guy described these shifts as being completely peaceful, with no strange occurrences. He worked there for about 3 months when a factory worker came from asking to see the boss in. The guard obviously didn't know who the boss was, so he asked the employees section, and I want to look for his superior there. Except when he opened the door, or nothing was there. Literally no people or machines for inside. The interesting thing, though, was the fact that the noise of the machines were so loud that he couldn't hear anything else. When he looked up at the ceiling and his jaw dropped to the floor, love, there on the ceiling upside down, where people working on their daily duties on the conveyor belts on the machine is, etc. in the garage is set up and down, thinking it was a mirror, an optical illusion, but that wasn't the case, because he couldn't see his own reflection anywhere in the machine. Play people on the floor where he was, and it was just done that. He realized that the floor he was standing on, it wasn't a floor at all, it was a ceiling, and neon lights were hanging from the floor up in. The guard suddenly felt dizzy, yet he described it as staring down from a very tall building, and then he got out of there not sure what he just seen. He told the worker that he couldn't find his boss and told him to wait for him or find himself at land, etc. The guard continued working and is still there. As far as I'm aware, there was another guy who worked in an orphanage on a daily basis working and want to take a mental toll on his staff member is, so you can imagine why no one wanted to fill the spot when HQ gave information of a vacant position there. The guy who had gone the jobless for a while and was aware of the potential rest but was in desperate need for a job. The rules were simple: stay on the orphanage grounds under the caretakers to the job at 9 a.m. every morning. At the orphans would all gather in a big room from there. The guards had to put on thermal goggles and inspect everyone. If any of them didn't emit any heat while he goes wrong, in other words, if the guy will show the orphan being devoid of the colors would show up with a bottle of the temperature they were supposed to be stop on site. The guard said everything was fine for a while, and then one day he saw something wrong with one of the orphans. All the others were shown as yellow, red, and green, with the thermals. Whereas this boy was completely color, that is. The guard was caught off guard, no pun intended, and instead of following directions to take to get out, he informed his partner. When the partner double chat, there was widespread panic as the other kids ran around and the caretakers tried to calming them down. As a partners go to the guard for not shooting right away. Yet the guard told me that he had started to feel sick when missing a child gets taken out right in front of them. Until the next thing that happened, the kid, who was a targeted eye, started driving on the ground and producing this high-pitched screaming like a bird. The guard described the kid, "What are the mountain?" Until all that was left of them was a steaming rat and gooey substance on the ground. The guard. I asked what that was and his partner explained. He first showed him some pictures of kids, except they weren't kids. They had completely white eyes, pale skin covered in purple veins and sharp teeth. Some of them were slightly creepier, with elongated, next emaciated extremities. Are unnaturally hunchbacks. Apparently these creatures have found play into the orphanage, taking the appearances of normal children and patiently wait for a naive family to adopt that. In most cases when that happens, the parents are usually found and tragically dead, or sometime later, and the kid is placed back into the orphanage for a new family. It's unknown how widespread those creatures are. One thing is for sure, this isn't the only orphanage for Christmas. All the turn the office where I work at except intervention, get a day off. Doesn't matter what shift you're doing, but by 5 p.m. on the 24th you need to be out of the office. One of the guards offered to stay when you're, stating that he and his wife were in a fight and he didn't mind doing a little bit overtime. HQ wouldn't even hear about it and threatened to fire him if he was found on grounds after the aforementioned time. I figured it was just their way of saving up some money. An intervention is basically 4 units of intervention in the office for Christmas Eve. It's crazy, haha. We usually have just 1 unit and that's only in case of emergency. Yet but for Christmas something strange comes around. The first time that I saw it for years ago, and back then every few minutes, and I didn't understand it but figured that they were just irritated that they weren't with their families. 11:50 p.m. comes in the United States. Simply let's move. I didn't know what this was about, so I just followed my squad. You know that building? You're never supposed to answer, no matter what you see here. Wow. We went inside there in the later let us straight into one of these staff restrooms which had a huge fireplace, and I had to before I knew what was going on, and everybody was pointing their guns to the fireplace, and he squad leader looks at me and tells me to shoot as soon as I see something. I was a little nervous, to say the least, but I fell on my orders and I try to stay calm in this line of work if you lose your cool for even a second. So, anyway, we waited with our guns that trained in the fireplace and everyone was silent at first, and I heard my watch be able to indicate that it was midnight, and, as if I'm Kiowa, I heard it some kind of noise coming from above and I thought it was coming from the ceiling and I pointed my gun up, but the commander yelled at me to keep my gun pointed at the fireplace and the scratching from above got louder, as if whatever was there was going down the chimney. And then there is something that sounded like a thought right from inside the fireplace. And then I heard something that still chills me in my bone whenever I remember I had to. You know, Santa has his trademark that but a very slow ho ho, ho, ho man. It sounded as if there were 5 people saying it at the same time, but a perfectly synchronized ho ho, 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 ho. And then a hand came out from inside the fireplace, a skinny, pale, wrinkled up, and which grabbed at the side of the fireplace as if to get a better grab. You could clearly see that this thing wore a Santa's clothing, but the sleeves seemed old and dirty. I saw something that looked like additional fingers coming out of his wrist, but they popped out for a split second and I say shriveled. A pale creature with a dirty gray beard and red eyes. I thought that was my imagination, but I was later able to confirm that this thing had dozens of limp hands just sticking out of various parts of his body, yet sometimes as a full, just like that, disappeared back into the fireplace. The commander gave us the order to cease fire, and so we did, and we listened to as our bag to teammate, to screamed, and horror while Santa dragged him through the chimney. Before we left, he gave us one final mocking, ho, 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 leaving us in complete silence. We never saw too many. Year after year this thing has been coming back on Christmas Eve, and HQ was trying to various methods to stop it. Automated, sure, it's a traps, you name it too. One year they even put classes on the floor to hold the unit members from being snatched away. The guy who got back that year, the only thing left of them were his feet still stuck to the floor. Why don't we just leave it be, you may ask? Well, if we do, someone suggested wants to just leave some low-life scum from prison as tribute every Christmas to this creature. So they may start doing that, starting this year, and if they can pull the red strings. But one thing is for sure, it always comes back, and each time it does it has more hands coming out of its body. Here there was a place where I was stationed for 2 months, which is a warehouse of some. Another warehouse itself was made for mannequins and simply consisted of one big room filled with hundreds of mannequins which were no longer in use when I was to work alone there in the shed. So the senior guard was about to retire. It took me for a tour around the place. He gave me a flashlight and he told me to follow him. No, I'm going through a room for the mannequins. Come with our company. It's even worse, the warehouse patrolling roads, and get your gun ready and keep the safety off of. The senior guard told me not immediately put me on edge, but he seemed pretty calm and he had been working there for the past 6 years, so I figured you know what he was doing. This. Give me a nasty place if you're not careful of, he said. What's up and down for her? Tell me, what do you see with your flashlight? I scanned the row of mannequins, checking each one of them out carefully. Some are missing heads. Others were missing arms or hands, or they were just dirty and overused. Other than that, they seem like normal mannequins. Nothing, I said. Press the button on the back of your flashlight. The senior guard said. Instead of the regular light, my flashlight started emitting a black light. He told me to scan the area again. I slowly moved my flashlight from left to right, illuminating the mannequins with purple eyes, and everything seemed normal at first, but then my heart jumped in my throat. I stopped the light on one female man again, which seemed different. It wasn't a regular standing position with one hand up, as if explaining something, but that was in. The odd thing. The mannequin wasn't really a mannequin. The crude body shape and the separations between joints which make a mannequin disdained were gone, and I was instead looking at a realistic human woman and older clothing. As soon as the backlight had reached your face, she shielded her eyes and then started screaming like a banshee, showing off rows of sharp teeth, and I pointed by Gunther the thing. But before I could fire, the senior guard had already put a bullet between the woman's eyes. She was still in her screaming position with arms and legs spread, but her head was gone as it enrolled or somewhere in the background. Like I said, a nasty place. He said, always use your black light and check every one of them. They're really sneaky. You see that one there which was in the company is security uniform and missing an arm? That was George. At the guy who worked here before me, he said what I asked. Well, apparently he got a little drunk before the shift, and when I arrived he was like this, on the floor, all manic, and I asked, missing an arm? There were a few other mannequins around him and positions that suggested he was ambushed and killed by that. We are strictly forbidden from touching a movie of, so there's no way he managed to put them in there and such an elaborate position, especially given the fact that he was so wasted. And anything else that I should know? I asked. Yeah, of course, if you hear footsteps somewhere, it means that you may have missed one of them and now it's trying to ambush you. It's really important that you retrace your steps if that happens and find out where it's hiding. It's never going to move in plain sight unless you point the black light at it. Can I hear footsteps? And as soon as you turn around, everything will be still and quiet and you look at the mannequins. Sure that you saw them in different positions and postures. A minute, Ogawa, or are they seen closer to you, but you won't be able to put your finger on it? In that case, it's better to be safe than sorry. Go back and check them all out once more and shoot them one that looks human. Just one bullet in the torso ahead, and your choice is, they're pretty fragile, shoot 3 more mannequins by the end of the sweep. And once we were done he said, oh, and they may sometimes beg you to spare them, pretend that they don't know how they got there, and so on. If they do that, it means they're trying to distract you in. Another one, maybe sneaking up on your way. In that case it's best to shoot the thing and run to the nearest corner from. There is slowly in the area once more again one slip up. Luckily you don't need to do one sweep or not make it impossible to peer inside. The guard would carry a bucket full of meat, some of the rotten, and he carried around a piece of paper which said, which meat it goes into which cage for one kid, whoever. He had to take a lot of pig and leave it to a slide which it dropped directly into the cage, and he described it just seconds after the pig was delivered in. You would hear a deep growl when the pig, screaming, in agony, hair loud, chewing, came from inside the cage for a few minutes. After that the pig would stop screaming within the first minute. The second strict rule, he has to follow us to patrol the area 3 times during the night and make sure your all locks are secured tightly here, calling the repairman for replacement if there's so much as had their paint scratched. If he was to see any external damage on the KitchenAid, needless to remain as still as possible, then just move his hand enough to radio HQ by uttering the code 1098. He was true, man as still as possible until the intervention unit arrived and escorted him out of there. And he never got into that situation now, but he did feel like the first, if you should have said, because he would often hear growling, thrashing and banging on the bar's display, not being able to see that. He was sure the animals knew exactly where he was at all times because you could hear them following him alongside the cage when he patrolled. He also said that he would often have armored units arrive in APCs armed to the teeth. Escorting something out in a cage is so secure that C4 couldn't get through it, and they place the animal and its enclosure and leave the place without a word. I asked him what exactly was being guarded there, and he shrugged to saying, well, I can tell you one thing for sure, whatever to keep each other company, and generally nothing ever happened in the hotel. Michael told me about the night when he decided to quit the job and in the middle of a shaft. It was around 2 a.m. in the morning and he was patrolling around the 2nd floor, checking each room. The rule was that if they found anyone, anything in any of the rooms or even heard any noise, never to go back to the reception and call the intervention. You had to. So anyway, Michael went about his patrol normally. Here when he's sending me heard a noise coming from the bathroom in room 204. He radioed it into his co-workers but no one responded. He tried multiple times but it was as if the line was dead. Now I wanted to go all the way back to the reception and, being curious about the noise, install the approach and open the bathroom. He saw one of the guards there standing in front of the mirror, guard Sean from 403 to be precise. Michael asked him if he's okay, but Sean just stood there staring at the mirror, and when Michael described as twitching his shoulder and his head from time to time, when Michael grabbed him by the shoulder, Sean turned around and made his co-workers. Apparently, John's face was completely distorted, as if one was stretched to the side of his face. Michael said that it looked like Sean was wearing a leather mask, what you failed to put on his face properly here. And it was just sitting there sideways. Sean and staggered towards Michael with an outreach arm, muttering something incoherent and a muscle tone since his mouth was practically where his cheek was, revealing the sides of his teeth in the door for a shot and tumbling down the stairs to the re. I want to go out there. He tried a radio in his co-workers again but only got a muffled groan as a response over the radio. He panicked and picked up the phone to call intervention when the door is suddenly burst open and two of his co-workers were there laughing their butts off. Michael asked them what was so funny and they said it was all just a big prank to scare him. He put the phone down and breathed, so I believe he didn't get angry and even commanded them on, "A job well done, put in such a realistic mask on Sean." This is when it's two. Co-workers gave each other a weird glare when Michael asked them what was wrong and one of them simply said, "Sean wasn't in our prank." It was then that I realized that Sean was unresponsive on the radio. Michael described to being in a trance. From that moment he doesn't clearly Sean, and when he didn't respond they belongings on the counter of the reception and laughed through the front door, never to come back again. I hope you all enjoy the variety of stories I've had since my time working for the company. This is all. Stay safe out there.